Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another NerdTube discussion video. Right now, it's Final Fantasy time, and I am joined by Majo Rage, and we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy 16 and whether or not it's going to be a single-player protagonist game. Mage, first off, how you doing?
Doing great. Greetings from the Mage's Sanctum.
Okay, so what we're going to do really quick is we're going to take a quick look at an article that came out not too long ago on the 21st. Basically from uh, Nikoi Yoshida. I know I butchered that name. But so what he says right here, now let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. It says, okay, so in this paragraph, it says, for the battle system, we've not only given the main character Clive an arsenal of powerful attacks and abilities based off of these traditional Final Fantasy summons, but we're allowing him to cycle through those attacks in real time to deal those attacks in real time. This allows for powerful combinations and smooth, stylish gameplay that both looks and feels great. So me and Mage were kind of talking off stream a couple days ago, and he brought to my attention the fact that this interview was, they're using a lot of verbiage for a single protagonist type game. So of course, me and Mage are like, we got to talk about this because this is Final Fantasy. So uh, Mage, what are your thoughts on this article and what it means for Final Fantasy 16 coming up?
I think there's a lot to unpack in this article that Game Informer put out with their interview with Yoshi P. They talk a lot about the plot setting, trying to go back to the more medieval kind of setting. The verbiage is interesting, though. Lots of buzzwords that we're used to seeing from other series, and a lack of a certain term, which is, to me, core to the Final Fantasy series. They talk about the producer who's come in to handle combat, Suzuki, who's known for Devil May Cry 5 and Dragon's Dogma, both single-player protagonist real-time combat games. They use stylish, one of those Devil May Cry buzzwords. They did not say magic, though, even when the interviewer used the term when discussing settings, previously seen in the Final Fantasy game series.
Yeah, and I agree. The way, and I'll link the entire article because it's a Game Informer article, and I will link it down below where everyone can read it for themselves. And as I said, they have not confirmed that this is a single protagonist game, but they are definitely using that verbiage. And for someone like myself who has played a lot of Assassin's Creed games, which is technically a single protagonist game, I still don't like this idea for Final Fantasy because even in Final Fantasy 14, which is also mentioned in this article, you do have a single protagonist just by the nature of an MMORPG. But you have a lot of other mainstay characters that are a constant rotation in the storyline and are around all the time. But even with that, they even said at one point, they said, yes, but Final Fantasy 14 was built from an MMORPG from the ground up. This is going to be a single player game built from the ground up. Now they said single player game. They did not say single protagonist. Again, we're not confirming anything. We don't want to, pretend like we're not pretend, but we thought that this was worth the discussion of saying, do we want a single protagonist Final Fantasy 16, like Final Fantasy game period? Like, do we want just one character to run around and then have all these mainstay characters rotate in and out? Because we had Final Fantasy 7 Remake, which was an action RPG, but you could always switch between your characters, which I think there were, 4 of them, but throughout the main game: Cloud, Barrett, Tifa, Aerith. I don't think you could switch Red 13.
No, you couldn't control Red.
Yeah, and I don't think you control it. So it's basically those 4 characters, I believe, that you could control in that game. But still, you still got to be able to control the characters. So my main concern is as I said, I like Assassin's Creed games, and those work well with the single protagonist. Final Fantasy, not so much.
No.
Oh, go ahead.
A party is also central to Final Fantasy. What it is down in its core. I mean, you know, usually party of 4. We've seen as small as 3, as big as 5. At one time controllable in battle, but it's a party-based role-playing game.
Absolutely. And that's, as I said, that is kind of one of the main things that defines Final Fantasy for what it is. Now, I will step back for a second and say, okay, they did take a Final Fantasy and they did do a MMORPG style type of game. And that was Final Fantasy 12. It was a single player game, but they did it in an MMORPG type style because you play Final Fantasy 12 and it's undeniably taken favors away from Final Fantasy 11. You know, the big open world, the way you interact with things. So that game, and I love 12. Don't get me wrong. 12 is probably in my top 5, probably at this point. Just because of gameplay alone, not because of story. Final Fantasy 15 trimmed down how many characters you have in your party down to 4. I always felt like that was still too few, but it gave us a lot of time with those 4 characters, and they had more of a bro bond than any other character or any other party that I felt, in any other Final Fantasy. And I'm not saying they were better characters, but there was definitely more of a bond between these characters, I felt, than in any other Final Fantasy. Maybe Final Fantasy 6 with a couple characters. Maybe 9 with a couple characters.
But
really
not the entire party at once.
Yeah.
Like this small band of 4 bros. I mean, and they sold that in the very short amount of time I spent with that title.
Oh yeah.
So,
And I mean, to be fair, I mean, having 4 bros on a road trip, that's a lot of the problems that people had with this game, was that there wasn't enough character diversity. Yeah, you had Gladius, which was your brute. Yeah, you had Ignis, which was kind of your smart guy, your smart, wise protagonist. You have Prompto, who's like that young, dumb, impulsive person. But it's still like, okay, so you still have some of those core elements in there, but there's still a bunch of other elements to a party that you need to have. And I felt like I liked 15 well enough, but I still feel like they didn't sell the party as well as they could have if they added maybe 2 more characters, like had a party of 6, And honestly, have at least 1 or 2 girls.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
like, I mean, I'm not one of those that's like, oh, you should only have 1 or 2 girls in a party. Like, I'd be fine if there were 3 guys, 3 girls, 4 girls, 2 guys. I don't care. Like, that doesn't matter to me. But still, you need to have that diversity in there, because it does seem like it's just 4 white dudes just driving across the U.S. in their fancy car, listening to music. And it's just like, like at least 13 sold, 13, for all the issues that it had, it sold like a very diverse cast. And I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about just the way that everybody was portrayed, like,
right, different personalities
yeah.
and archetypes interacting with each other. They had an actual overarching goal and quest. They came together through kind of different circumstances and a common adversity and adversary. And that's more in line with what we've seen out of more Final Fantasy titles. That feels more like Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm scared that Square Enix, kind of overcompensated for a lot of the gripes that people had about the line of Final Fantasy 13 games, where you had a section of the fan base is threatened or alienated by having a female main protagonist.
Oh, and I mean, for me, that I like female main protagonists. I mean, I don't care as long as you tell a good story. Like, I didn't mind Lightning so much. When I play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I played with a female because I was so bored with the male assassin protagonist. Like I wanted like one of my favorite Assassin's Creeds is Liberation because they did such a good job with the female protagonist in that. Like they made her very diverse and they made her very competent, and I love that. So I definitely, I that's just one of those things. Like having even Terra in six, like I consider her more of a main character than Locke, even though Locke is a close second. I still feel like Terra is main over, and even Celeste. I think we talked about this before, where there's like almost four main characters in this entire, 4 or 5 main characters in six technically.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that point. If you were have to pick two, if you're going to pick one for each of the worlds or acts of the game, it would be Terra and Celeste, though.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
13 wasn't the first to have female main protagonist, but it's the only one I would say that has an arguable female. That's definitely the protagonist, though.
And she's on the cover. Well, technically, I think isn't Terra on the cover of 6? I mean, there's Locke nowhere to be seen.
Logo. Terra's
like Locke's nowhere to be seen,
which is a lot of the ammo that the Terra's the only main character crowd uses.
Yeah, and that's okay. But back on track. So Final Fantasy 16. So let's spin this a little bit. Unless you have something else to add about what we were just talking about.
No, I don't think so.
So let's spin this a little bit more. So what if they do this as a single protagonist? They try it out. Are you willing to let them try it out, or do you feel like that this is going to be a new trend that they're going to be going into that they will continue with? Like, how they change, they even say in the article that every new Final Fantasy has a new battle system, has a new type of system in it. So what if they're just trying it for this one, and then they may go back to the party system after this? Like, if they do that, are you still okay with it, or do you think they're going to stick with this formula of single player action RPG and,
Square Enix has never been afraid to change up what they're doing. But if it is successful and they find that it was easier to develop, I'm afraid they could get lazy about it and switch and abandon the party system. Either way, it shakes out for this title. I am going to check it out and give it a try. I always pick up and give a try the new Final Fantasy title. And so far, they could do something that would change that. I can't imagine many things that would do that, though. But I think they tried it already in the Stranger in Paradise. That only had the one, correct?
Well, but you also had party members with you all the time. So, right? I haven't played Strangers in Paradise. I own it, but I haven't played it yet. I just haven't had a chance to get around to it. So, yeah, I know. I'm losing my Final Fantasy nerd card. I can't help it. But I want to actually sit down and play it when I actually have time to sit down and play it, like and actually be focused on it.
But the fact that we're in doubt about it means that they've got their marketing so honed in on a single protagonist already that we're not aware. And party's always been something that they've built and marketed around before in mainline Final Fantasy titles.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Strangers in Paradise is more along the lines of Final Fantasy 15. I believe that you do have other party members that are with you all the time, but I think his name's Jack, I think, is like the main person you use. I don't know if you can control the other party members, but as I said, I don't know if I want that, because even in 12, when you had that, like, you had your party members, you could jump from person to person and control them.
Mm-hmm.
Just like in 7 Remake, you could jump from character to character and control them. We're talking about no character, unless you have like a guest character, like you have guest characters that join you for certain fights or certain missions, like
they
in
did
like
that Mystic Quest
or Horizon Forbidden West or Zero Dawn.
Okay.
They do have that too, like that. I'm playing that one right now, and it's like 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 I can't. I'm trying to imagine because Horizon Forbidden West is a great game, but as a Final Fantasy, I'm like, I can't. I don't know if I can get behind that.
At what point do we lose what makes Final Fantasy a Final Fantasy in the name of modernization and in doing something new just to do something new?
But here's the other thing: we just had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge come out last week, and it's a banger hit, and that is as retro as they come. And I mean, I know I'm over exaggerating a little bit because but still, like those old Turtles games were coming out around the same time as these Final Fantasy games. So I'm not saying we have to go back to like 2D pixels and stuff like that. But is it really that bad to take a step back and do something more like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy IX, just with better graphics, bigger and better mechanics? Do we really have to modernize Final Fantasy that much? I don't feel like we have to modernize it as much. I feel like if they put more emphasis on gameplay and game design, kind of like Dragon Quest does, they're the graphics and stuff like that, like they still do that animation. I mean, it's gorgeous animation, but it doesn't look more real. You have parties, you even have cuts into battle. You don't even, it's not even
Mhm.
like real-time battle, it's cuts into battle, like
Cuts into
with Dragon
battle,
Quest 11.
turn based. You're
Mhm.
seeing the enemies in front of you. It's the same presentation that Dragon Quest has done since game one.
Yeah.
You just more polished and modern, but the same style of presentation.
And everybody loved 11, and that game was long as hell. Like they put what that extra space on that disk drive, or on that disk, what they had, they put that into storytelling, because just when you thought the game was at an end, you go into the third act. There's still a whole third act. I don't know if you've ever played it, but I mean,
I've only made it into the second act, but
oh
I've
gosh,
heard so many good things.
yeah, it's good, because then you go into the third act, or you think you're ending the game, and then you realize it's only the end of the third act. Some people even say it's like some people say it's only the halfway point. I don't think so. I think it's more of the third act. It's 2/3 of the way through. But still, why can't Final Fantasy go back to that? As I said, like I'm not being nostalgic. I'm not wanting the Final Fantasies of old. But you're right. When do we lose that, what makes Final Fantasy? And that's what is worrying me, is the fact that why can't we just hone in on the craft that is Final Fantasy and make it better? You know,
I agree. And something that disconcerts me is bringing in the action game developer, Suzuki-san. I just, I can see, he points out in the article how not many people in the team were used to making an action game. And it's just, sure, it's bringing fresh ideas, but are these the kind of ideas that should be brought in to Final Fantasy and into Square Enix?
mm-hmm.
There's a reason why people at an RPG company didn't know how to develop an action game.
Yeah, that is 100% on the nose. And I mean, even in the interview, he even says, like we don't, we don't know what we don't know what we're doing here, but we brought in, Suzuki-san, and he's made everything better. Well, better for who? You know what I mean? Like he, that's and the verbiage, my point is that the verbiage that they're using in this interview gives me reason to worry about the direction that this game is going. And as I said, it may come out, even if it is single protagonist, it may be good, and I may be eating my words. I mean, I may be eating my materia table shirt here, when the game comes out, and I may love it. But at the same time, I know that if there's no party in it, I feel like it's still losing a part of the soul of what a Final Fantasy is. And I'm all for people making what game they want to make and yada yada, but at the same time, I don't have to buy it, you know, like you're also trying to appease the fans. So I don't know, any closing thoughts, Mage?
You just know you hit it all on the head with that last statement. Final Fantasy fans will vote with their wallet at the end of the day, and there are ways to try the game out without having to sink your $60+ into it right off the rip.
And actually, and your point, you're right. Is they what did you say? They voice their with their wallet. I'm saying it wrong, but
You vote with your wallet.
you vote with your wallet. But that actually happened in reverse for Final Fantasy VIII. Because look, I'm not here to say Final Fantasy VIII is a great game, it's a bad game, blah blah blah. I'm not getting into that argument. But Final Fantasy VII was such a major success. I think Final Fantasy VIII did even better technically in sales, but most of us can agree that it is not as good as Final Fantasy VII. But because so now here 16 is bad or 16 is it looks bad, what does that mean for the future of the franchise? So
that's true. And game rental is in about the same place, if not in a worse place than it was when 8 came out. I mean, it was
and the internet really makes it easy for people to make a harsh judgment call. I mean, you never know. There might be just two dudes sitting on the internet talking about how the game is garbage, and and somebody might watch that and think, "Oh, I'm not buying this right now." I don't know who those two people would be, but I mean, they might be here.
Could be, maybe next year.
Next year, maybe. So,
or next year you could be eating that shirt.
Yeah, that's true. I could be. God, I put it out there in the universe.
You put it there. We'll hold you to it next year.
I am not eating this shirt. I love this shirt. This is the Materia Periodic Table shirt.
Beautiful shirt.
I'll have to buy another one.
You buy a cheap other T-shirt, but you'll eat a shirt.
Yeah, I guess. All right. Anyway, Mage, thank you. On that note, thank you very much for joining me for this discussion. I love it as always. I'm glad that we could get our concerns out there into the internet so that all the people in the comments can judge us because we're just being either too harsh, too worrisome, or you agree with us completely, and we are the slags of the internet. With all that being said, Mage, thank you very much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me as always.
Please don't forget to like this video, leave us a comment, and consider subscribing to NerdTube. We are the greatest YouTube channel you've kind of maybe sort of heard of. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we will catch you in the next one.